Chapter 11. All aboard! It was 1946. Confident that Alice Jane and Bobby, both of whom had jobs, would be all right while I was traveling, I arranged for a trip to New York City by train, leaving Burton in charge. Burton, because he was a Southern Pacific employee with considerable seniority, procured a railroad pass on all trains going across the continent. Barbara, my youngest child, aged 12, was my companion. At the bank, I drew out $250, which was to cover all of our expenses. I shivered with apprehension and excitement as we climbed hurriedly onto the train when the conductor sang out, "All aboard!" and we were on our way. In Indiana, we left the train. My father was at the Cayuga station waiting for us. At his farm, we met Mother Mary, my father's school sweetheart, whom he had married at age 78 after both of their spouses had passed on. Shortly after arriving, and we'd been shown our bedroom, I slipped away and went to a beautifully appointed bathroom. When I came out, my father was waiting. Grimly and forcefully, he whispered, "That room is just for show. When you need to go, go outside and follow the path to the outhouse." Leaving Indiana, we moved on to Wisconsin there to detrain at St. Croix Falls and to be met by my cousin. We had a wonderful visit, learning much about each other. That was also my introduction to Midwest heat and humidity. Never have I been so very, very uncomfortable and hot. On the train once more, we headed for what is now called the Big Apple. Once in Grand Central Station, and having claimed our luggage, we ventured out onto the streets of New York City. The crowds and the pace on the streets were a bit intimidating, so Barbara walked as close to me as she could. I hailed a taxi, and in minutes we were registered in a first-class hotel in downtown Manhattan. One day, we ferried to the Statue of Liberty, where we climbed up the base of the Lady. I anxiously waited as Barbara joined the Serpentine, climbing up inside the statue. After what seemed like hours, Barbara ran to meet me. She was thrilled and was completely entranced by the view of the water and the city from the crown. Our last evening in New York was spent at a nightclub to taste a bit of nightlife and entertainment. We thoroughly enjoyed the food, the entertainment, the ambiance. And the next morning, we taxied to Grand Central Station and boarded the train for home. I still had a couple of dollars in my purse. After we both had retired, our first major trip was across country to the East Coast and on to the World's Fair in Canada at Montreal, Expo 67. My number one grandson, Tom, joined us in New Jersey by air. He was 14 and had just graduated from the 8th grade. Bob and Nancy were a happy part of the merry tourists. In Maine, we stayed overnight at Bar Harbor and dined on lobster. When my dish was served, I drew back in horror. There, artistically arranged, was the whole lobster looking right at me. "Take it away," I muttered. My son quickly remonstrated by saying only one word, "Mother!" Then he proceeded to handle the lobster, and I found it was truly a delicacy. That night when I climbed into bed, I screamed, for there was something between the sheets. Pulling the covers back, I found a life-size cloth replica of a lobster. I kept it for many years. After a wonderful time at the fair, we had a very special day in Quebec where we toured the ancient city in a horse-drawn carriage and then re-entered the United States. My maternal ancestors had lived in Cornish, Maine. At sundown, we entered Cornish, a charming village. There we went to the cemetery, hoping to find the graves of an ancestor. In the fading light, we found two. It is hard to explain, but in that place I felt an affinity for those long-ago family members. Driving west was fascinating, for everything we saw was a revelation to Tom. How that thrilled me. Reaching the Bay Area, we brought Tommy home to the Ecos's brand new home in Livermore. From the time of my birth until the time I came to the mountains, I was close to water. First, Puget Sound in Washington, and later the Pacific Ocean, San Francisco Bay, and a bit of the Atlantic Ocean. On my swing in our backyard at 11 or 12, I felt I was on the ocean, wild and deep, swinging and singing, sailing, sailing over the ocean waves. This all began as a young child when we traveled by steamship from Seattle to San Diego. In later years, many a time I took the train to San Francisco. The train ended in Oakland, and the final leg of the trip was by ferry across the bay. I recall one crossing when the fog was so dense that the captain guided the boat only by signals from crew members stationed at the prow. On that day, I was frightened. I have been fortunate to have had several wonderful trips on cruise ships. Burton and I joined the Ecas family one Christmas for a trip aboard the fabled Love Boat, where we came ashore in Puerto Vallarta and later Acapulco. Many years later, I was Eleanor Van Fossen's companion on a trip through the Panama Canal. There we experienced our huge ship float up and entered another body of water at a different level. Somewhat later, my daughter Barbara and I took a ship into the Alaska Inland Passage. On this trip, as we floated quietly in Glacier Bay, we watched a piece of a glacier slide down and fall into the bay. The process is called calving, which created a tremendous roar as it splashed and reverberated like the shattering of a thousand panes of glass. How excited I was when Alice, Jane, and Bob invited me to join them for a cruise on the Mississippi. Our paddle ship was the newest and most luxurious, at that time, the Mississippi Queen. From San Francisco, we flew to Memphis, where we were lodged at a hotel for several days. A tour of the city was very interesting, birthplace of the blues, as well as the place where Martin Luther King was assassinated. And we took delight in watching the parade of ducks as they marched through our hotel lobby. We boarded the Mississippi Queen, our home for several days, as a jazz band serenaded us. Whenever the calliope sang out, we knew they were going to lower the gangplank. Stop after stop, we were amazed at the beautiful antebellum estates, their guides often in period dress. We left the Mississippi Queen at the port of New Orleans. Our hotel was very close to the fabled French Quarter. There we spent most of our time, charmed by the sights. We dined at 3 famous restaurants, each distinctly different in its ambiance and menu. Never to be forgotten was viewing the New Orleans cemetery. It was all on stilts to prevent flooding and desecration of burials. I wonder what it must be like now after the devastation of Hurricane Katrina. Here, up in the mountains, the Sacramento River flows through Dunsmuir and is not far from me. So in a sense, I am always close to water. When Bob and Nancy asked me to take Shawn, age 4.5, to Philadelphia, I was very pleased, not only to be with my grandson, but to see Philadelphia for the first time. My anticipation of the venture was great, and the prospect of having with me my adorable grandson was wonderful. For Shawn, it was the first time he rode on this kind of train. We both enjoyed Philadelphia, as every single moment was fascinating. Many years later, Shawn recalled this trip. I remember the excitement leading up to the trip, realizing that you were not only going to be spending time with me, I lived for those days you visited, but you were also taking me on a train trip to a city in a distant land. I was so excited. I remember being on the train, looking around, and in the window reflection seeing you with me as the land passed by in super speed. I would stare at smudges on the window and pretend that anything they crossed in the landscape would be cut down at that point, leaving a trail of Shawn edits to the scenery. I remember being in the lobby of the hotel in Philadelphia and wandering into the convenience shop. The man behind the counter had a huge 3-inch by 3-inch dime. I had a growing coin collection, so you bought it for me. I couldn't wait to get it home so it could live with my other coins. I knew that it was a fake, but I pretended that it was the big brother of the other coins. I remember going to the Philadelphia Mint, another major moment in my fascination with coins. although to this day I still have a hard time understanding how we are able to keep on printing money and where it actually goes. I remember watching a lightning storm from our top floor hotel room. You told me how copper conducts lightning, pointing out the window to a pointed rooftop on one of the buildings in the distance. You taught me why I didn't need to be afraid, because nature had a way of dealing with these things. I've applied that concept to many possible scary moments in my life, and I've come through strong. I remember the Liberty Bell and how I was sad that it had cracked. I really wanted to hear it chime. Now I truly understand the nature of liberty and how fragile it actually is. That trip was very special to me. I was able to spend time with my grandma, who I love, learn from her wisdom, and have fun along the way. It's not often that I experience times like that. I'll always hold those memories special to my heart. How beautifully Shawn recalls this memory for me. Going to Victoria, BC with my granddaughter Susan is one of my happiest memories. Susan had just graduated from 8th grade. By train, we went from Portland to Seattle, where we boarded a fine steamship. Susan proved to be a good sailor and was not upset by the ship's motion. As the ship docked in Victoria Harbor, our eyes were immediately drawn to the magnificent Empress Hotel, which would be our home for several days. On the second day, Susan asked permission to go for a walk along the historic seawall by herself. Taking a deep breath and wondering what Barbara would have done, I smiled, hugged her, and told her to be careful. As soon as she left, I began worrying. Not until I saw her crossing the Empress lawn did I quiet down. I was thrilled to hear her excited narration of her adventure. At night, the city was a panorama of blazing lights, for every building, including the impressive Victorian Parliament, was outlined by twinkling lights. The wonder of it all was the magical reflection in the still waters of the bay. Susan, as soon as we read the list of attractions, urged me to take her to the Wax Museum, where one could view copies of famous people made of wax and dressed in appropriate costumes. Susan was more interested in the torture chamber, and finally I agreed to go with her to the basement of horrors. There we viewed tableaus of people made of wax being tortured using every conceivable device. Our last afternoon, Susan and I dressed in our prettiest outfits and took Victoria tea at the Empress, a fitting climax to our visit to Victoria, BC. Here Susan offers some of her impressions. I was thrilled to receive the 8th grade graduation gift from my parents of a trip to Victoria, BC. I thought it was wonderful that my grandma would be joining me on this adventure. From the moment I gazed upon the Empress Hotel, I was amazed by its grandeur and immense size. The Empress captures the elegance of a bygone era, and tea with Grandma at the Empress was a special treat. I felt like a princess. The 55-acre Butchart Gardens were impressive. What a delightful experience to leisurely wander the paths that began with one woman's plan to restore the desolate pit that was her husband's limestone quarry near this home. I was in awe of both the amount and variety of plants, as well as the many hours of labor it would take to maintain the beautiful grounds. My trip to Victoria was a wonderful experience. What was best about it, though, was that those experiences were shared with my grandmother. I will always cherish those memories. Laden with gifts and eagerly anticipating Christmas with my son and his family, Alice Jane, Bob, and I flew from San Francisco to New Jersey to be warmly greeted by Bob. Our first activity was a tour given by Nancy of their House Beautiful. In the corner of the parlor between the fireplace and in front of the tall windows stood the Christmas tree, radiant in all the bright, sparkling ornaments. Their home was truly a work of art. The renovation had taken more than 8 years. Bob told us that we were to have an adventure in New York City the next day. At precisely 3 o'clock, Bob called up, "Our limo is here." I chuckled at that, donned my coat, purse, and gloves, and came downstairs. Opening the front door, and what to my wondering eyes did appear but a white limousine and a courtly gentleman driver who was to be ours for 10 hours. A limo was a new experience for all 5 of us. Our first stop in New York City was Rockefeller Center. We joined the merry crowd looking in awe at the Rockefeller tree. It was dazzling. It was there that the Christmas spirit seemed to fill us. In the first RCA building, we took the elevator to the 86th floor where we visited the Rainbow Lounge and had a drink. We were thrilled with the nighttime view high above the city. Back in the limo, we were on our way to a restaurant called Sign of the Dove. We could not linger long there, for we were back in the limo heading to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. There we strolled through the great halls and stopped at a gallery resplendent with a 30-foot Christmas tree covered with dozens of golden angels. No sooner were we seated than the choir, clad in long satin off-white robes, filed in. They regaled us with ancient Christmas carols. It was an enchanting evening, which made me feel more and more like Alice in Christmas Wonderland. Back in Upper Montclair, the driver passed Bob's house by mistake. He pulled over to the curb to turn around. Another car pulled alongside and lowered its window. Our driver lowered his, and a voice, clear as a crystal, said, "Do you have any gray poupon?" And they sped away. There was a moment of silence, and then we all burst into laughter. When we disembarked from the limo, we were still chuckling. We were home, but too excited about the day to even think about sleep. The following morning, we looked forward to the matinee of an off-Broadway production. Well, the play had closed, but we found a charming restaurant on the Hudson River. We picked the best table in the place, which offered us a spectacular daytime Manhattan skyline. We enjoyed a leisurely, delicious luncheon and chatted until the afternoon began to slip away. What a merry, merry time we had Christmas morning. The dining room was fully decked out for the holidays. On the mantel hung the stockings, each handmade. Besides Bob and Alice Jane, Bob and Nancy, and myself, we were joined by Andy and Shawn and his girlfriend Sally. It was a full table. What a fun time we had opening the stockings one by one, showing what Santa had left for each of us. There were many amusing things, and the room echoed with hearty laughter. Then we had a luscious Christmas brunch, the traditional baked eggs, a Coon tradition. We went to the parlor to exchange presents. What excitement, what surprises, much laughter, many oohs and ahs. It was a wonderful family time. We had tickets to a new Broadway play the day after Christmas. There were huge traffic problems when we reached Manhattan, so Bob let us out to walk to the theater as he headed for parking. The play was called Master Class and starred Zoe Caldwell in the role of Maria Callas. We all enjoyed it. At the airport the next morning, I was met by a porter with a wheelchair who took me right to my seat in the plane. With my seatbelt fastened, I then became aware of loud, bumping noises as they loaded baggage. Almost like being awakened, the loom jumped to life and began to interlace and bring together a variety of new threads. The shuttle moved back and forth, under, over, under, back, cush, swish. The shuttle was working with new vigor now. There was another sound now as the jet engines began to take us into position for takeoff. A major thrust of the engines moved me gently, but with force, back into the cushion of my seat. As we began that race down the runway, my memory was suddenly jolted, and it took me back to another time, another flight.